So as of now, watch what we say.
We call that our Zoom collect.
There you go.
So we have Victor, Jason, and Kevin's joining us, and they are parish pastors.
Okay.
Greg is one of our hybrid ministries. we have what's called a new worshiping community, and Greg heads that up, an outdoor worshiping experience.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
And
that's great.
And Barb is just a utility player. Barb has done everything. So.
Does it all, huh? Yeah. Every presbytery needs one of those, huh?
Well, we could use about a dozen more, but
yeah, a few more. Yeah, but at least one. Yeah.
So Joel is joining us from the Center for Pastor Theologians. It's a group I found out about some time ago. And
real quick, Larry, just as a byway of prayer, I don't know if everyone noticed, but Sam Pendergrass's mother died this morning. So
yeah.
Keep Sam and his family in your prayers, if you would, please.
Thank you for bringing that up. So Joel, tell us about the Center for Pastor Theologians and your work.
Yeah, well, thanks for the invitation. Really glad to join with you all. I've spent a little time in upstate New York. When I was in seminary, my wife and I spent some summers up at a camp in the Adirondacks and have been through that area. Love that area. So I'm in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. Our organization is actually in Chicago, but I kind of commute back and forth. So yeah, so the Center for Pastor Theologians was founded about 15 years ago. Or so. Our mission statement is equipping pastors to be theologians for today's complex world. And that is kind of driven by a conviction, kind of a number of convictions that all hold together. The conviction that, if you look through most of the history of the church, the pastors of the church were the primary theologians of the church. I mean, we can click off the great names that we remember, the people whose work has endured over time. And chances are that that person was a pastor actively serving in the church. So it's our conviction that the proper location for theology is the church. And that pastors are called and equipped, or ought to be equipped, to be the primary theologians of the church, which doesn't mean that every pastor should be able to read Aquinas in the Latin. It doesn't mean that every pastor is writing theological tomes. It means that our pastoral identity is shaped by the understanding that we are at heart theologians, that we are at heart called to carry that theological work and shepherd our congregations theologically, that the church is strong, the church can be strengthened through that theological church of pastors, that theological work of pastors. And so what we aspire to do is to gather pastors into different kinds of fellowships that we have, in order to encourage those pastors in their ongoing theological formation. And in some of the traditions, some of the denominations in the American church, you have some kind of a continuing education process. You have some kind of pastoral fellowships that take place. What we have found in our work is that for a great many pastors, there's no real structure for them to both connect relationally with other shepherds, and in that to also continue their own formation theologically. That perhaps some pastors will continue their own theological formation, but that's kind of their responsibility, what they are wanting to read, what they are reflecting on, what they are studying on, but kind of a structure for pastors to bring them together for both relational equipping or relational fellowship and theological equipping is a space that we think there's a great need for. And so we're kind of building into that space. We do that through, we have 3 different kinds of fellowships that we do as an organization. We have what are called ecclesial theologian fellows. And there's about 100 fellows that we have in network, in fellowships that meet once a year for 3 days for a theological symposium. So they come to Chicago. Pastors from all over the United States and Canada come to Chicago for a few days of pretty intense relational work and also theological study and theological reflection. We bring in an expert in some kind of a field. Right now we have a grant through the Templeton Foundation, and we're working on virtue formation. So we're in a 3-year cycle. We did hope last year. We're doing love this year, and we're doing humility next year. And what we're doing is we're bringing in someone who's in the social sciences, who is studying virtue formation in the social science, from the social science perspective. And then we're bringing that person in to interact with our pastors to reflect on what the social sciences are learning and how that can shape pastoral ministry. So we do 2.5 days of pretty intense study. Some of our pastors will have prepared a paper that is interacting with the social sciences as well as their own pastoral ministry, and getting them to bring their findings, their learnings, their thinking, bring that into conversation with our other pastors. So those ecclesial theologian fellows, the vast majority of those have PhDs in biblical studies or theological studies. And that is one of the requirements that we have for that fellowship, is a PhD that person is then utilizing in their work in the church. We then have local theologian fellowships, and that is pastors who don't necessarily have PhDs, but who are gathering in different places around the United States, kind of local pastors doing this work of fellowship and study. And then we have student theologian fellowships. We have fellowships at 20 seminaries across the United States. And what we want to do there is get students who are thinking about their vocational identity to be introduced to the idea of the pastor theologian as a vocational calling, that perhaps they then might pursue further education, but not with the goal of going into the academy, but with the goal of utilizing their education for the sake of serving the church and being theological shepherds of their congregation. Sorry, was there a question, or did someone? I heard something, so wasn't sure that was one of those phantom Zoom things that sometimes comes through. You never know. So our work involves, it really is centered on these fellowships, getting pastors together in relational networks, out of which comes theological production, theological work. And that theological production can be a book, can be a sermon series, it can be a Bible study that a pastor is writing for their congregation in order to guide their congregation. But really our goal, our desire is to connect pastors in fellowship with one another for the sake of producing what we call ecclesial theology. And what we mean by ecclesial theology is, if you think about the 2 kind of main areas of theology that are predominant on the American scene today, you have academic theology, right? So that's theology that is written in seminaries and universities for the academic guild. You have popular theology, which is usually not super theologically rich or thick. It tends to be maybe a little less robust than what we would like. And then in the middle, we think what's missing is this idea of ecclesial theology, which is theology that's written by pastors for the church, that fronts ecclesial questions, that fronts church questions, but seeks to answer those questions from a pretty robust theological perspective, that's doing thoughtful work, but isn't appealing to the guild, isn't, as I teach in a seminary as well. And so when I write academic work, there you have to footnote everything, and you have to make sure that everybody knows that you thought of everything that anyone else could possibly think about. You've got to do all that academic guild work. This isn't about that. This is about fronting ecclesial questions, reflecting on the challenges, opportunities for the church, reflecting on the nature and the mission of the church in our time and in our place, and writing theology in a way that is accessible to the church, but isn't popular, isn't sort of watered down or dumbed down, but is theologically fairly robust, that challenges and stretches the church in its own understanding of itself. I saw a question pop up in the chat. The Doctor of Ministry degree is certainly, I look at the Doctor of Ministry degree as it can be a good example of ecclesial theology. I think can very much be the vehicle for that. A lot of the DMin programs that I'm aware of do tend fairly aggressively towards sort of the practical, and we certainly we're not against practical and the practice, but a DMin degree tends toward the practical, where a PhD degree obviously tends more towards the theological, the theoretical. And I think an ecclesial theology wants the best of both of those to come together in thinking deeply about the theology, and then thinking deeply about the praxis of that theology. So a DMin degree, depending on how it's done, depending on what its goal is, I think can very much be an excellent asset to the church, to a local congregation. A pastor who's doing a Doctor of Ministry degree, thinking through theological implications of some issue facing the church, or some challenge facing the church, or some program that the church is wanting to develop, but doing that really from a deeply theological perspective is a great way to go. Yeah. So I think that's a good overview kind of who we are, what we want to do. We have a national conference every year in October where we have pastors come together to engage with one of the complex issues facing the world. So in October, we had a conference called Confronting Racial Injustice. We were going to, in 2020, do a conference called Kingdom Politics. That got scuppered by COVID. 2019, we did one on technology, and kind of thinking through technology from a pastor theologian, from an ecclesial theology perspective. So that's kind of who we are. I'd be very happy to interact with any questions at this point in time, or anything else I can do to kind of help you understand our vision or who we are, what we do.
I'm intrigued by what's on your vision and mission page on your website, seeking theological renewal.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about theological renewal. Basically how you came to see the need for it.
Well, I think we came to see the need through it, through not just the last 5 years of what's happened in the life of the church, though that has been deeply disconcerting to us, but over the last, it formed in 2006. Our first meeting was in 2008. I think we had seen a lot of the signs that the American church, so much of the practice of the American church in general, so much of the structure of the American church was really being driven by pragmatic concerns rather than by theological understanding and theological conviction. There may be some theological convictions hanging around, but in terms of sort of how churches are structured, what has captured the vision of the pastorate, there's this great line from Stanley Hauerwas where he talks about pastors. He says pastors are a quivering mass of availability. Is the line, and he's talking about really an identity crisis in the pastorate. What are we? Are we CEOs? Are we COOs? Are we cruise ship directors, kind of making sure everyone's having a good time and they know where the next activity is? Are we therapists? Are we activists? Right? What are we? And if we don't know who we are, then that means that our churches are making demands of us, that have expectations of us that aren't being driven by the actual theological shape of the church. It's being driven by all kinds of other factors. So I think what we saw coming together 15 years ago was pastoral burnout. Why is that happening? A lot of that is happening because we've lost our own sense of identity and we've become a quivering mass of availability. And so pastoral burnout, which was rooted in a real lack of clarity about what the church is called to be in the world, because again, ecclesial mission has been taken in lots of different directions, lots of different ideas, but isn't really centered in a theological shape, a theological conviction. So to get to a healthier church, it's our conviction that theological renewal is an essential part of that, and connecting the various, I'm talking about the American church. Obviously, there's lots of different, we all know there's lots of different denominations, there's lots of different convictions about what that means. But generally, taking the American church back to some of the theological roots of the great tradition and reflecting on ways that our congregations, that our polity, that our theological convictions maybe have been disconnected from the great tradition of the church, and instead have become driven by more Americanized, pragmatic concerns that tend to dominate local congregations and therefore dominate local pastors. Does that help?
Yeah, that was beautiful. That was wonderful. Local fellowships, how do those work?
So at this point, we only have about a half a dozen of them. We are looking to really expand that program out. That's one of the things that we see as a real need moving forward. So
would you like one in central New York?
we would. The way, here's how it works. The way that we've done it in the past, and we're kind of thinking about all of this actually, like literally right now, we're in the midst of all these conversations about where this goes. What we have tended to do is find one of our ecclesial fellows, so who is part of one of those groups that comes to Chicago every year, find out, or wherever they are, have them find pastors that they think would really connect with this vision, and then gather those pastors, and that person kind of be the shepherd of that group. Now, as we look to expand, we don't have ecclesial fellows in every place across the United States. What we are looking to do is build a structure where we can get pastors who are interested in this in lots of different places that can kind of be connected to us, that we would be producing some content. We would be producing some video kind of series that we would do that could then be utilized by local fellowships to interact with some of the material. We're not there yet. We're a couple years away, really, of getting there. But I will certainly keep Central New York in mind as we move forward, because what we want to see is 20 years from now that the pastorate in the United States has been really reshaped by this vision of the pastor theologian, which again is not like we discovered this and we're inventing this. This has been the dominant vision of the pastorate for much of the church's history until a couple hundred years ago, when the academy and the church started to kind of divide out in ways that, again, speaking generally, ways that have tended to locate theology now in the academy. And the academic theologian is the one who does theology, and the local church pastor may kind of get some theological training along the way, may utilize some of the academic theology work in their own ministry. But we've gotten to that place where when people think theologian, they think somebody writing thick theology books for the academy. They don't think pastor. And as I do a local fellowship here in the Twin Cities, and this has been one of the really remarkable things to see, is what happens when these pastors start to say, oh, I am a theologian. Mm-hmm. And that's core to who I am. I've always kind of sensed that, but no one ever gave me the permission to do that. I never gave myself the permission to think of myself that way, because I think of my seminary professors as the theologians. When I was making a shift, I was full-time in a seminary teaching for 8 years, teaching theology, and then I shifted into be a senior pastor of a church here in the Twin Cities. Somebody asked me, oh, are you sad that you're not going to be a theologian anymore? And that was just so illustrative to me of the problem that we have. And I was like, actually, no, I'm going to where theology happens. That is the front line of theology, is what we do week by week by week in the pulpit, in counseling, in marriage, in weddings. This is the theological work of the church. And I just think we need to reinvigorate this vision of the pastorate as the place that holds that theological work. So what we want to do is get to as many local pastors as we possibly can to encourage them in that mission, in that work.
I have to believe there's a hunger for it.
We're certainly finding that. That is certainly what we're seeing. At this point, we're at the point now where we're not big enough to do all that we could do, given what people are wanting. I would love to snap my fingers and say, let's do this in Utica. You guys are already doing, it seems like you're already doing something like this that has come out of this gathering. Mm-hmm. And so, if you are doing this, we can come alongside and give some kind of suggestions. At this point, we don't have the structure in place to really unfold it into what we're doing. But we want to get there, because we think this should touch every pastor anywhere needs to have this vision.
We would welcome you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
We have this Zoom weekly pastors call, but we also have a bunch of pastors to get together once a month. And in the past, we've done studies from Stenke and others on just the whole family dynamic within the church. And we're always looking for new material as we start up again in January. So I don't know if there's any on your website that we could, use, borrow, steal.
You can, whatever's on our website, you're free to use. What we tend to have right now on the website are podcasts. So we will interview pastors from within our network, kind of their journey. We'll talk with people who written books that we want to talk with them about. Recently, we had a few months ago, we had one, I don't know if you know Eugene Peterson. A new biography of Peterson came out recently by a guy named Wynn Collier. And so I interviewed Wynn about Peterson, about writing his book, about the vision of the pastorate. So we have those kind of things. What we're really looking at ramping up next is kind of materials that we can get into the hands of local pastors that could then shape conversations, be a part of the conversation. So we're again, the first 15 years or so of the organization has been really focused on building this network of ecclesial theologian pastors. And what we want to do now is, in light of the needs of the church, the challenges facing the church, which, as we all know, have not gotten any less in the last couple of years. What we want to really do now is start to expand out our ability to connect with, support, encourage local pastors in their task of being pastor theologians.
Maybe we could spend just our last few minutes together. I'm intrigued by the mission. You opened by talking about how the practical has come to dominate everything. We spend an awful lot of time amongst our group talking about family systems theory, differentiated leadership. But there comes a time when the pastor has to put a stake in the jello. And say, I get all of that. One of our pastors sent me an article from Sojourners about why pastors are joining the Great Resignation. Our jobs have been reduced to negotiating skirmishes about mask wearing and vaccination status. The tyranny of the practical. So I just like to hear you talk a little bit about how the work that you are doing equips pastors basically to stand up to that.
I recently heard a quote with someone who said, the person who asks what's practical has lost their imagination. And I was intrigued by that, which I want. Obviously, we all know that there is practice to life, right? There is the practical, but what frame are we coming from that determines the possibilities of the practical? And I think that's what we are really wanting to do, is say, we think that there should be practice in the Christian life. Of course, Christ calls us to follow him. There are practical things that means to be called to follow him. But he does that from a framework that re-envisions the world for his disciples. And so he's not calling them to follow him from within the frame of praxis that they already have. He is calling them to a different vision. He's re-narrating the world for them so that they will live in that re-narrated reality rather than the reality that is before us, that we can see. And I think one of the challenges that pastors have faced is because, in my view, the American church has largely allowed itself to be shaped by the practice of what we can see. We have not been good at re-narrating the world for our congregations. We have not been challenged to do that. And I think now all the challenges that we're facing is we're seeing the emptiness of so much of the narrative that has driven the American church. It's coming to its conclusion. We are seeing the death throes of the narratives that have shaped the American church. And if we're going to be a healthy community as the body of Christ, we're not going to just kind of shuffle a few things within the narratives that have been dominating us. That's the practical I'm concerned about. What we need to do now is say, we need a whole other way of coming, and I would propose maybe a more biblically faithful way of coming to understand the nature of the world around us, the nature of our own congregations, how our concern for the practical maybe has led us to some pretty unhealthy places. And as pastors, take on the challenge, and it is a challenge, and it's not going to be easy, to re-narrate, re-envision the world from a different perspective, that then within that, we can say, okay, now how shall we then live? Here are the practices of this life, but they aren't going to feel very practical if you're used to kind of a Christianity that comes alongside what you already think and what you already kind of want your life to be, and ultimately isn't really challenging and leads us to some pretty unhealthy places. So I think the last few years have revealed some of the unhealthy narratives and are calling us as pastors to step into that and really to challenge, encourage, call our people to see the world in a different way. And that's theology. That's the theological task, in my view.
Very rich. Thank you. Anybody got questions? Well, we're at the end of our time. So Joel, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Yeah, really glad to do it. Want to chat again? I'd be happy to jump on at some point in time. And if you have other thoughts, other follow-ups, you can find my email at the Pastor Theologians website. I'm very happy to interact and love to do whatever I can to encourage you in your ministry. And thank you for serving the church. It is not easy. It is hard work. Grateful that you're doing it. Just want to encourage you to continue on.
Well, thank you. And
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joel.
Would love to be a hub for you.
That sounds good. Well, let's stay in touch. I appreciate the invitation and great to meet with you all.
Yeah.
God bless.
All right, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The Lord
Take
be
care.
with you.
And
Also with you.
Bye now.
Bye.